I have a question. Certainly as elected officials, we have a responsibility to ensure that our town is safe and that activities happening within our town are safe. And reading through the application, I noticed that there is a plan in place for if during the burn construction or digging out and relocating waste, hazardous material is discovered. I noticed that the construction or the operation was supposed to halt immediately. Workers working on the project are supposed to have access to protective gear and they're supposed to be evacuated. What I didn't notice was that there was any plan whatsoever to address residents living nearby, to address notification of the town, and if residents need to be evacuated, where are they going to go? Who's going to pay for that? How is that going to be addressed? That's something I want to know. Please, if you do NCES or DES,
Thanks for the question. I don't know that that is something that we have addressed in any of our landfill permits, but I think it's a fair question, and it's something that I would encourage you to present as part of your formal comments, or others may do it as well. It's something we can look at. Obviously, our ability to address that in some cases may be limited by the rules, but we'll look at that and see whether that is appropriate or whether it's something that's available to us to do. It's important to keep in mind that any facility can be the victim of receiving something that it's not supposed to receive, and that that facility isn't designed to handle. It's an unfortunate truth about the world that we live in. And certainly over the years, DES has responded to hazardous materials that have been delivered improperly to town transfer stations, to commercial facilities, to landfills, to town landfills, to private landfills. It's a reality of the waste management business, and we try to deal with it. We've responded in the case to those and worked with the operator, whether it's a municipal owner of a transfer facility or whatever it might be, to make sure that the material that was received is properly packaged and properly disposed of at a facility that's licensed and capable of handling it safely. I think for the issue of whether or not you had something that was in such quantity that it posed some kind of an airborne hazard, in not only at the landfill, but landfill workers, and the other ones are usually actually ground zero and the ones who are most at risk if something like that happens, then that is really no different than hazardous material release anywhere else in your community. You could have somebody driving through in a pickup truck that has something in the back of the truck right on Main Street in Bethlehem that is in a container that starts to release, and you can have hazardous materials incident. And those kinds of things are dealt with by first and foremost.
You can't be serious with that comment. How can you be serious about that comment?
Well, sir, I'm going to finish, and you can come to the mic and tell us what you think about it. Okay? Well, what I'm trying to say is that hazardous materials incidents can happen anywhere, and there's a network of local emergency responders and the state emergency responders that try to deal with those things. They're very unfortunate, and we do the best we can to deal with them. But I appreciate your comment, and I encourage you to provide it as part of the formal comments in the comment period.
Thank you, Mike. I understand that. I guess what my concern is that what if something happens during the construction of these burns? What if they collapse, releasing waste beyond the boundary? It's those kinds of catastrophic things that I'm concerned about, and that I've heard my constituents express concerns about. And what I'm hearing right now is that basically the town's first responders are going to be responding to that, and I'm not sure that's the town's responsibility, or that we should be put at that risk. I have utmost faith in our town and our town's ability to respond to disasters, but I don't think this is really our responsibility.
I didn't mean to suggest that if there's some kind of a construction problem at the facility during any kind of operation or construction, that it's the town's responsibility to respond to that. The landfill is private property, and as with any hazardous material spill, when DES gets notified of a problem, First of all, I don't necessarily have a reason to believe there would be a hazardous materials incident as a result of some kind of construction accident. But if there were, it's the responsibility of the private owner of the site to contract with private response folks, people like Clean Harbors and all the other folks out there who do response to hazardous materials incidents to deal with that. To the extent that we're talking about a solid waste construction problem, the folks that are there at the time of construction generally are going to be able to handle something like that because that's the business that they're in.
Well, I certainly look forward to hearing NCES and DES address that a little bit further in September. I also have a question. I've been reading on your website, the DES website, and I need my reading apparatus for this as well, that DES has an environmental equity policy. Now, as you all are aware, and all of us in this room are aware, we're a small, rural, North Country community. We don't have a lot of resources. Folks up here don't make gobs of money, and we're just not very affluent. And I'm going to read about, I don't know how many folks are familiar with this environmental equity policy, but it says, the background, that there is a body of evidence which suggests that in certain instances around the country, minority and lower income citizens, neighborhoods, communities have faced an inequitable share of the risks associated with environmental hazards. And it goes on to further state that what is important is to recognize that inequities may exist and to make a commitment to work to eliminate them. The following policy statement and implementation strategy represents such a recognition and commitment. And the policy statement reads, the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services will, within its authority, ensure fair and equitable treatment of all New Hampshire citizens in the implementation of federal and state environmental laws, rules, programs, and policies. Now, I've heard you speak, Mike, in several instances at the hearings for 1429, when you came to visit the town, and you always reference the laws and the rules. You're going to, apply the laws and the rules to this permit. But I would like to know, since we are a lower income, rural community without the resources to properly manage the risks associated with a landfill, the testing, the environmental engineering, reading the reports, all of this stuff that goes with having to be a host community, I am wondering how you have applied this policy to this permit, or if you have applied this policy to this permit, or consider that at all.
With regard to that, we endeavor to apply the laws and the rules equally to all of our citizens, whether a facility is being proposed in an affluent neighborhood or in one of our poorest communities. Our job is to apply it equally and justly. In the case of the testimony that the department and I provided on House Bill 1429, the department continues to believe, and we stated many times during testimony before the House and the Senate, that host community agreements are something that are a good tool that should exist between private facility owners and host communities. We advocated pretty energetically in the legislature this session for that. We worked on, actually the final language of the bill regarding host community agreements was really language that we worked very hard to put before the Senate. Unfortunately, we weren't successful. We're certainly interested and willing to participate in a new process to look at that again in the next session of the legislature. And we continue to believe in it. Again, it's in my written testimony, it's in the verbal testimony that I provided. We recognize that facilities like a major landfill can pose particular burdens, particularly on small communities. And we think the best way to address those potential burdens are to use host community agreements to do that. We certainly encourage all communities that host a facility to try to negotiate those bilaterally and mutually with their particular facility owner. In the absence of doing that, we felt that having some legislation that would encourage it was appropriate, and that's why we advocated for that. I hope that answers your question.
I'm not sure that really answers my question. While I certainly understand your feelings about host community agreements, they really don't have anything to do with your environmental policy, and that's what I want to know about, how you apply that to this project. Because that stands alone regardless of any host community agreements or anything like that. And it should be considered as your own policy. And it's there to protect people in communities like the one I represent.
Sure, if you want a response to that or not. I think my feeling is that I did answer your question, and to repeat, the answer is that we endeavor to apply the law and the rules and our policies equally in all neighborhoods of the state, regardless of economic or other factors. And beyond that, I'm not sure I can answer that question.